Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I'm Loretta Rupert, the Business Development Coordinator with NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A window. There will be a variety of questions, and we just ask that you share your responses or put any questions that you may have in the Q&A. We will monitor the questions and try to answer them in the allotted time. And at the end of this session, I will share a link to an online survey on how to receive a certificate of completion for this webinar. Today's webinar, Understanding the Whole Child, Unlocking Growth Through Wellbeing, is brought to you by ERB Learn. Our speakers today are Kelly Bornman and Jennifer Ziegler. Kelly has spent more than 3 decades helping schools create environments where teachers feel confident, supported, and deeply connected to their purpose. A nationally recognized leader, she helps educators turn complex data into actionable strategies. With teaching credentials in New Jersey and California, she also contributes to organizations such as NIS, ADVIS, ISTE, and SAIS, and other independent school associations. Jen is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor based in Dallas, Texas, with deep roots in the independent school community. Jen works in private practice as a counselor and educational consultant, giving her nuanced understanding of independent school culture and the pulse of current student needs and priorities. She is passionate about advancing whole child initiatives, equipping educators and parents with practical and compassionate strategies for student success. This webinar will highlight recent research on student well-being and learning growth in private and independent schools with a focus on Catholic schools. They will discuss why student well-being matters in schools and offer ways to conceptualize well-being across a student body and share strategies for setting an intentional course to understand and support student well-being. Before we begin, let us take a moment to pray by beginning with a moment of silence and beginning in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, thank you for the gift of teaching and for the students you place in our care. Grant us wisdom, patience, compassion, and ensure that our words and actions may reflect your love. Bless our students, their minds to learn, their hearts to feel safe, and their spirits to know they are valued. May our classrooms be places of light and kindness where knowledge and faith grow together. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. I will now turn it over to Kelly and Jennifer. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Loretta. We're just delighted to be here. We also have our colleague, Jen McPartland here. Jen is part of our educational services team, and Jen is going to be supporting us in monitoring the Q&A, as Loretta said. So thank you so much, everyone. We are just excited about this conversation. And before we get started, wanted to just give you a sort of little bit of information about ERB as an organization. We are proud to be a sponsor of NCEA. We are a member-based organization that serves independent and private schools around the world, with most of our members here in the United States. We have about 1,500 members with over 300 Catholic schools that utilize our products and services. So during the session today, we're really going to talk, as Loretta set up, about this, about well-being and student well-being and how we can conceptualize that, how we can monitor that, and then share some insights from recent research that we've done. Again, please don't hesitate to put any questions in the Q&A. Jen McPartland will be monitoring that, and we'll be sure to leave time at the end for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen Z. She's going to start us off. So Jen, take it away.
Yes, wonderful to be here with everyone. And I think it was so lovely to begin with a prayer, and thinking about the whole child is where we're going today in today's conversation. So thinking about kind of what is student well-being and what is the world that our students are functioning in every day. What does that look like? And as we were well aware, the pace of our students' world has changed, particularly in the last decade, taking into account COVID, this constant hum of stimulation from devices, from notifications coming in, from social comparison, which has always been a factor of our students' lives, but kind of all coming in at once, from multiple sources, and that academic pressure as well. And so our kids are learning in a culture that's very much focused on instant gratification at times and immediate responses. And setting the stage for a conversation about well-being is so important so that they're not dealing with all of those pressures without those interpersonal skills that can help mitigate some of those external pressures. So that's why this conversation really matters. I know you all know that our role as educators isn't just to prepare them to know things, it's to help them learn how to be in the world, how to be thoughtful, how to be resilient and well anchored. And so really, student well-being is what makes all of this learning possible in such a climate as today. So when we talk about student well-being, we're not just talking about happiness or mental health in isolation. It's this combination of feeling safe, known, capable, and for our students to do that holistically, emotionally, socially, and academically. A student with a strong sense of well-being can handle challenges, connect with others, and engage deeply in learning. And really, we believe that that's the soil or the bedrock that everything else can grow from. I impart you to think about a student right now who maybe, that's the case where you really saw that their ability to learn and grow academically in your class was unlocked because you connected with them in some way or because you understood them in some deeper way. So we know that student well-being matters, and when students feel emotionally balanced and connected, their brains are more open to learning. They take healthy risks, they can persevere, and they build the kind of character that our missions talk about. It's really that academic growth following emotional stability, not simply replacing it. Kelly, I'll let you kind of speak to, as we get our heads around this topic a little bit more and conceptualizing well-being, what does it look like for the students at our schools?
Thanks so much, Jen, for sort of setting up the conversation. So as educators, there are many, many ways that we're engaging with our students, both formally and informally. So, kind of as you're thinking about your own practice or that in your school, what are some of the ways that you observe student well-being? And we can think about some informal ways, whether it's where a student might be sitting in a group or in class or at lunch. What kinds of relationships or interpersonal skills are you observing as they engage with other members of their class or with the faculty? It may be checking in with a student. I know when I was an advisor, we'd kind of do a daily check-in with each individual student just to kind of get a pulse of where they're at, whether it was a thumbs up, thumbs down, or sideways, or smiley faces, or however that might be, but just some informal way to connect with them, even just greeting them at the door and getting a sense of where they're at. So these are all really important ways of how we can connect with the other, in this case, students or other adults in our life. Also being aware as we're giving back grades or feedback on a project. So some of those informal ways really inform any micro adjustments we might be making in the moment in time as we work with our students. Other schools may be using some more formal types of assessments to conceptualize well-being, and we're going to talk about one of our tools in a moment to kind of frame some of our research. But this might be, schools might be using Google Forms or Survey Monkeys, or like I said, little paddles that you would hold up during COVID when I was teaching. Yes, I had students sort of had something using like the little emojis on the Zoom features. So a lot of different ways to do that. Some of you may be using zones of regulation or mood meters in a more formal way to assess these. Regardless of the tools that you are using, the difference between that informal and that formal assessment is that when we have those formal assessments, it allows us to gather some data, formal data, which can then help us conceptualize a little bit more of what's going on with our students, not just at the individual level, but also at the group level, which can then inform practice and help us not only in that moment, but also to think more broadly about the culture in our school and how we support our program and our teaching and learning. So as we consider some of these things, we can take a look at a broad framework of understanding student well-being within the school setting. So ideally, we're looking to build systems that allows you to keep a pulse on what's happening and how your students are developing individually as well as collectively, but also noticing important trends. So I think as educators, we kind of know there's an ebb and flow to the school year, and can kind of think about what it's like before or after holiday break, or if something particularly exciting is happening in school, we can kind of, if testing's coming up, we can kind of think about those ebbs and flows of the school year. But data can really help us understand those trends a little bit more deeply, and then allow us to program or inform our work around that. So when you have a more formalized assessment program, it gives you that opportunity to see not only interventions, supports, but also what's going really well for your community. So these trends and patterns can help us view that data, and also helps us produce some more valuable research. So on here, there's some questions to consider as you're thinking about assessing your students or understanding their well-being in a more formal way. So for us as an organization, ERB is a provider of different tools for schools and our school members, and we have academic assessments as well as our measures of well-being and social emotional skill set. We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail, but it became clear to us in our work with our member schools that they needed some tools to help them understand and conceptualize these types of things we're talking about today more formally. So as we were thinking about that and why we want to measure that, we really want to have this holistic picture, as Jen mentioned earlier, of our students, both individually and collectively. Also helpful for us to tailor those responses and services to individual groups or individual students, and then also to make sure that we have data that can help us inform larger school initiatives, whether you've got a strategic plan, if you're going through that accreditation process, or making any other kinds of adjustments. Maybe you're building out your staff and thinking about what kinds of information can inform those decisions. This kind of formal assessment can really help you understand that, and of course, understand your community more deeply. So as part of our commitment as a nonprofit, not only do we work with our members to provide tools that they need, is really this commitment to research and understanding what's actually happening in the schools that we're serving. So in recent years, particularly post-COVID, there's been a lot of interest, I should say, in the research on the impacts of COVID, particularly around learning, but also trying to understand student well-being. So in 2023, we embarked on a pilot study with 15 schools of about 2,000 students to better understand the impact of student well-being and their social and emotional skill set on academic achievement. So we asked schools to use 2 of our carefully developed tools, which I'll talk about in detail in just a moment, to be able to support through that study alongside of an academic achievement tool. So what we did confirm is what many educators already know, is that successful student outcomes are dependent on so much more than just academic instruction. So to understand the research a little bit more, I want to introduce the 2 tools that were foundational to this in terms of student well-being and social emotional learning. One is our check-in survey. So this is a survey of student attitudes around their emotional well-being, their sense of academic engagement, and their sense of fairness and belonging in their school community. Schools can use this over the course of the year on a cadence that makes the most sense for them. It is, again, students survey, so students are responding to that attitudes, and it's most effectively used when there's a regular cadence kind of checking in with students over the course of the year. In terms of these 3 dimensions, this is not a diagnostic tool, so it's very important. It's different than the tools that your counselors or your learning specialists might use, but this is perceptions. So in fairness and belonging, overall sense of their inclusivity in the school environment. Very important, how do they feel as they engage in their work every day and engage with others on campus? That academic engagement, overall interest in school and the work that they're doing, and then that emotional well-being, their overall sense of happiness and stress. I think it's important to understand that There are aspects of childhood development, and certainly Jen's area of expertise. There are natural periods when students are moving through, different stress levels, relationship development. And so that, as we gather trend data, can be really helpful as we kind of understand students' development, but also what those cadences might be. The second tool that schools use is Selfwise. This is our student survey of the social and emotional skills based on CASTLE, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, those 5 core competencies. And this really helps educators understand sort of the pathways and the skills that students have in order to interact and navigate with the world around them. So those 5 core measures are, and students respond again to a series of questions. It's another quick survey of their attitudes relative to self-awareness. So do they understand their own emotions, their thoughts and values, and how they influence their behavior around in different contexts? Self-management. I was a middle school teacher for a long time, so self-management is definitely in that developmental phase, but how do they manage their own emotions and their thoughts as they're moving through their own physical development, emotional development, and cognitive development? Social awareness, their interactions with others, their ability to empathize with others, including those from diverse cultures, contexts, and backgrounds. And then we also have relationship skills, so their ability to establish and maintain and engage in healthy relationships, again, navigating through a diverse group of people that they'll interact with day to day. And then that responsible decision making, which again is sort of part of growing up and learning. How do we make choices, and what are the impacts of those choices, whether it comes to our academics or our social interactions? So as we asked our pilot group to administer these tools to their students alongside of an academic tool, in this case was the CTP, which is our comprehensive testing program, what we found in that research is that foundational to a student's ability to engage academically and to continue to learn and to grow are these core 5 skills. So that students really to flourish, they must be able to have a solid skill set in these areas to handle the demands of schools, particularly when we're thinking about many of the schools represented here and those high academic and achievement standards. We also found that as students continued to foster those skill sets, that it also fostered for them their emotional well-being, as well as their sense of fairness and belonging and their academic engagement. So there are correlations between these, with fairness and belonging being, again, that sort of most important aspect of a student's well-being in how they relate to others and how they also engage with their academics. And so on the screen here, you'll see some R values or correlations and some sizes of arrows to help you unpack that a little bit. But fairness and belonging most strongly correlated with students' emotional well-being. So when students feel like they belong and are treated fairly, then their well-being is directly impacted. And then we also see a correlation with that academic engagement, and then also between emotional well-being and academic engagement. So essentially what we're saying here is confirming, I think, what we know intuitively as educators, that all of these things are really important. So when students are feeling like they belong, when they feel emotionally well, and then they can feel academically engaged, that is going to support their learning. And then when they have the skill set to be able to navigate the demands of their day-to-day lives, that this is really going to be critical for their academic development as well. So again, we know all of this, but as students feel emotionally whole, they're able to concentrate, their energy levels are higher, they develop stronger coping skills for things that may be difficult, helps them build and maintain better relationships, successfully overcome any challenges that they face, and then of course to move through their academic engagement. So as we understood that first pilot study, it was really important for us to continue that. That was just one small subset. So last year, we engaged with over 15,000 students using the check-in survey. So this next piece of research is going to be very specific to that check-in survey. So those 3 domains, again, emotional well-being, academic engagement, and a sense of fairness and belonging. So I'd like you to kind of just think about your own schools, your own students, and think about those three domains. And then we're going to talk very specifically about students in grades 3 through 8. The reason we chose that segment to kind of focus on is there's just so much happening developmentally there for students in socially, academically, developmentally, physically. So that's a really interesting segment of the student population for us to take a look at. So again, 15,000 students spread over those academic years. And let's take a look at some of the data. So on this first screen, here are our national trends. I have that note here. It is our independent schools. So these are ERB member schools, so our private and our independent schools around the globe. 15,000 students. And if we just take a look here for a moment, we will see, beginning with our third graders through our eighth graders, you'll note on the left-hand side that the scale is from a 3.0 to a 5.0. So one thing that's important to know is that students respond to questions on a scale of 1 to 5. So because I wanted to kind of blow this up and to zoom in, we have that scale between 3 and 5. So first thing to note is overwhelmingly, all of the students in the survey, and on average, reported their sense of academic engagement between, in this case, actually between sort of a 3.5 and a 4.5. So our students are already above that midpoint collectively in terms of their academic engagement. What we will notice here is that our third and fourth graders are hovering just above a 4.0. And then we start to see a dip and a decline as students move into the middle school years. Now, keep in mind with our students in this survey, in some cases that middle school years will start with 6th grade. In other cases, that middle school years will start with 5th grade. So that may be some variation depending on your school as well. But we do see a decline here between lower school and middle school. I'd like you to just hold that in a moment, kind of think about what that might mean and how that might resonate with your students. And we'll pull it all together in just a few moments. So here's our next dimension. This is a student's emotional well-being. So again, we'll see that scale is the same between 3.0 and 5. So again, all of our students are averaging above, in this case, right at 3.5 to about 4.0. So a little bit lower than that academic engagement, but again, that overall average above the midpoint. We see a slightly different pattern here. It's a little bit of a deeper dip, between grades 5 and 6. So again, just sort of holding that in your mind. Our lower schoolers hovering right about that highly engaged or highly confident in their well-being, and a little bit of a dip as we move into middle school. And then our last dimension here is our fairness and belonging. So again, that same scale just looks a little bit different here. Again, seeing that third and fourth grade, this right above that sort of 4.0 mark. And then we start to see this gradual decline as they move through middle school. So as we think about what that might mean, first of all, again, pointing out that of these 15,000 students, that they are all on average above the midpoint. So overall, students expressing a high confidence in their academic engagement, that they are strong sense of fairness and belonging, and that an emotional well-being. That does not account for individual student results. So we know that there are students who aren't necessarily falling into that midpoint. And so that's really important to understand. But as we point out, and for those of you who may be upper elementary or middle school educators, will notice that there's a real shift and change between that 5th and 6th grade, right? We really start to see things kind of dip down a little bit. And Jen, I'll ask you, either Jen, actually, if either of you want to kind of chime in on what your thoughts are here. But having been a 5th and 6th grade teacher for a big chunk of my career, this is not wholly surprising to me. I think it's important to note, but Jen, you want to jump in there and add anything what might be happening at that age group?
Yes, I was thinking that as whenever we get to this point in the conversation, I think it's um, very much on par with students at this age, kind of having some deep reckonings and thinking about obviously checking a lot of things amongst their peers. There's a lot of I think social kind of contagion or commentary to be had there about really just being a little bit all consumed with kind of what's going on at the peer level and some blinders on in other spaces and perhaps feeling like a lot of things aren't fair. Homework, things, going on at home, parents kind of just don't understand. All of those factors come in at this age, and certainly a little bit in at the early stages of high school as well. So I always find this piece of data so interesting and illuminating in that context.
Thanks, Jen. And one of the things that I think about as well is there is this transition period, right? And if we think about the cadence of our schools, and again, it may be unique for each of yours, but there's a shift, often in that lower school where we're in a self-contained classroom, or perhaps we're trading out for specials, art or music or PE. But there is this shift in many middle schools where now we're changing classes. We have many different teachers as opposed to perhaps, a special teacher who may have taught multiple grades in the lower school. So there's that natural transition of adjusting to what's happening as the schedules, the demands are changing, often increased complexities with the academic subjects that they're learning, increased certainly with the homework and different demands, perhaps being more involved, more opportunities to be involved in different extracurricular activities. So when we're looking at this kind of data, if you're collecting this, this is kind of this aggregate data, but this could be really helpful when you're looking at trends over time. We know that there's a transition point between lower school and middle school. As we think about that, I know for our team and when as a sixth grade team, really trying to think about what structures are we putting in place for students as we begin those first weeks of transition into middle school and making some intentional decisions. This kind of data can be really helpful in thinking about programming and how we might support students, knowing this is a challenging time. As Jen said, there's a lot going on with them developmentally, but what are some structures we can put in place? The other piece of data that's I'll kind of tease out for you here is that we do see consistently that stress around workload and stress around relationships is a large driver of that emotional well-being piece. So as we think again about, and some of that's natural, developmentally appropriate, but it also gives us an opportunity to think about what is our data showing us. So if you're using these kinds of tools, looking at that refined view of what exactly students are responding to in terms of these key areas, and how can we think about supporting students more holistically as they move through these transitions. So really interesting there. So one of the things is we are kind of alluding to here is that this intentional planning and gathering this data can be very effective in understanding where students are, but also effective in being able to support those students to help them reach their greatest academic potential. So kind of the key areas we'll kind of focus on here is that the collective tools we call this our whole child solution, really empowers you as educators to understand this emotional well-being piece, the skills piece, and then the academic piece. And just kind of thinking about that in kind of 4 key areas. One, it can help you expand your view. Often we're very clear on specific individual needs of specific individual students, and it's often really clear at students perhaps at 2 ends of the spectrum, whether we're thinking about their well-being or their academic engagement. But there's a whole 54% on average of students that are right there in that middle group. And purposeful, intentional use of tools can allow you to see not only those individuals, but also looking at that group aggregate data. Also allows you to acknowledge and prioritize. So if you're looking at the interconnected nature of your student experiences. We'll look at some reporting in a minute. That opportunity, if a student is thriving in one particular academic skill and perhaps not thriving in another, are there other aspects of their well-being or their skill set that we might be able to lean into to support that academic growth, or that we need to address and to support before that student is ready to kind of take on some more of these complex learning opportunities. Certainly the empowerment of the collaboration. When I was teaching, I was one who used like a Google form or a SurveyMonkey to check in with my students, but that was only just my students. I didn't really have this full picture of what was happening across the grade or across the division. So this kind of data can really help you with conversations collectively. And if you're having, some schools have sort of student group meetings where you're addressing concerns, this kind of data and information can be very helpful in those conversations as well. Also giving you some immediate feedback. And again, these are not meant to be diagnostic, but the check-in survey is really terrific if you have the opportunity to use it in response to something that may be happening in your community around the world. Kind of gives you some immediate feedback and can allow you to make some adjustments to support students in that moment. So here's just an example, what I was talking about earlier, of this collective view, this holistic view. And here we have on the screen, we have some self-wise data on the upper left in the blue, check-in survey in the green, and then our academic achievement tools in that kind of reddish and that golden rod. So this is an aggregate of over 440 students here, and just giving a snapshot of where students are both academically as well as where they are in these other domains. So for example, in this particular instance, academically, students are struggling a little bit more with vocabulary, but they also report a really strong sense of academic engagement. So students are highly engaged in their work, and they really report very skillful in their relationship skills. So how might we lean into that, right? In our vocabulary lessons, perhaps we can consider doing some more group work or other types of things, leaning into those relationship skills to help build that academic piece. But of course, one group view is only as good as the averages are. It's really important to also zoom in and take a look at individual students. So here's another snapshot type of reporting here, where we can look at this individual student profile, and it looks very, very different than the group profile. So having this kind of information can be really helpful, again, thinking about where is a student thriving, where do they need some additional support, where can we lean into their confidence. Again, the student very highly on this big green slice here, academically engaged. Also, again, reporting that they feel very confident in their responsible decision-making skills, but less so in their self-management. So that's an interesting construct right there. Making responsible decisions, but also struggling with some self-management. Where are there opportunities there to support that student or lean into those skills to then support their academic engagement as well? And just one other kind of snapshot here, yet another individual student with a completely different profile. So again, having this kinds of data can be really helpful as we think about the individuals that we're working with each day. So before we shift into another segment of our research that we've done, I wanted to just give you a more complete picture of the tools. We talked about a couple of them already that are kind of making up some of this research that we're doing. So here we've talked already about self-wise and check-in survey. I've mentioned briefly our CTP and our milestones. Those are our academic tools. So our CTP is our comprehensive testing program. I know many of our schools on this call might be using that, but this is a once-a-year tool that can be used for assessing students in terms of their academic skill set, both in math, reasoning, and ELA subjects. So some of the research that we did with the pilot program and the research that I'm going to talk about in a moment really takes a look at that student learning. It is a rigorous rigorous set of subtests, and we have different norms that are available to schools. We also have milestones, which is our interim assessment, an assessment of reading and math, also checking in with students, their understanding of those skills across the year. So similar to CTP, it is checking in on student academic achievement in those two areas. Unlike CTP, it is delivered up to 3 times a year. So schools will use these tools differently as they're trying to understand their student learning and their growth, and that helps them be able to correlate that information, their academic achievement, along with their emotional well-being, as we talked about, their fairness and belonging, and their sense of academic engagement. So the other thing I wanted to point out about check-in survey, which is particularly interesting. So the core set is just 15 questions, very, very quick, as I mentioned, but we also have additional modules that are mission aligned. And so it may be particularly interesting for the group on this call because we do have a Catholic school module. And this module provides an additional 5 questions that can be added to the check-in survey, and very specifically around Catholic values and how what students' attitudes are towards that, both in their academics and their school life. So very interesting. So if anybody's interested in that, you can choose that module. We also have several other modules that schools can choose from, including a custom module. So opportunity to add your own set of questions if that was of interest. So again, as you're thinking about culture and understanding your school community, that is available as well. So here's just a couple of sample questions so that you can see those things like, I find my class interesting, I feel like I can succeed. And then here are I'll leave these on the screen for just a moment. These are the 5 questions that are part of the Catholic school module. So you can see those here again as an option. Students are feeling supported and talking about and living their faith at school. Their experience of school has deepened their relationship with God. So this kind of information is available for any of the schools that choose to use that. Self-wise, we already talked about those 5 core areas. I did just want to show you, because I know we often get this question, here are some of those sample statements that are used on self-wise. It's a little bit longer than our check-in survey. It's 45 questions, or 45 items, I should say. It's not questions, but students respond on that same scale that I mentioned, that Likert scale, and it gives them an opportunity to understand things like they know how to interact or with somebody who's upset. They know how to avoid behaviors that could lead to other people getting hurt, and those 5 core CASEL competencies that we talked about. Okay. And then finally, I just want to mention that we are also partners with the Committee for Children and offer Second Step, and I know many of the schools on this call may be using Second Step as a program to support their social and emotional learning curriculum. We do have some research that actually aligns the self-wise tools. So as that, the self-wise core competencies along with the Second Step program, that research is available. Very interesting for those of you who might be using any kind of SEL program. A tool like Self-wise can be a really wonderful sort of pre and post. You know, where are we at the beginning of the year as you implement then this type of SEL curriculum, whether it's Second Step or something else, and then checking in with those students at the end of the year. So a little different than check-in survey, which is meant to be used on a more frequent cadence. Self-wise can be used in conjunction with any kind of SEL programming. And the fact that these two are aligned can also be really helpful as you're making decisions about curriculum and instruction. Of course, if you have any questions about any of these tools, we'll give you some contact information at the end, but just wanted to make sure that you had that. Okay. So I'm going to shift a little bit now and thinking about our most recent, this is a tease because we're going to come back and talk with you all later this, I think in December, about this ongoing research that we're doing right now about student learning and where we are sort of, 5, almost 6 years post-COVID. Where are students, sort of what's been happening? So I'm going to share some national level data now. And then when we come back together in December, we're actually doing an analysis of the NCEA data. So we'll be able to have a more refined view of exactly what's been happening with your schools over the last 5 years. We're also in part of a larger whole child study, which we'll have out in early 2026, which will give us a deeper dive into not only that check-in survey data we see, but also the relationship between check-in survey and Self-Wise and the CTP academic data. So a little bit of a tease here to take a look at this. So a lot of the headlines that we've been seeing, continue to see around student learning post-COVID, certainly at the national level, have been quite alarming. We know that from the NAEP results that public school students are continuing to struggle. Most have not returned to their pre-COVID rates of learning. And they're continuing to see a decline. So it was important for us to start undertaking some research to see if that also held true for ERB member schools, private and independent schools. So over the last 5 years, we've been conducting research to take a look at what's been happening on our students. And we've got a little bit to sort of share with you right now. So right now we've got some important information here, both for NCEA, and then we're also going to take a look at that in concert with some national data. And again, this is just early data out. We're going to do a little bit more, much more of a deep dive. But what I have for you here on the left is, in that darker blue, is NCEA data prior to COVID. So that 2018, 2019, this is for any schools that are using that CTP. And we took a look at student scaled scores. So the way CTP works is that it has what we call a vertical scale. So if a student takes a math test in 3rd grade and then 4th grade and 5th grade, we can take a look at that student's data over time and to see how they're learning and growing. And so we monitor sort of that change in growth year over year. And then we've kind of put that all together, aggregated. So on the left, you'll see in math, prior to COVID, students had about a rate of growth at about 8% per year. So that's kind of their learning growth. And then last year, you can see that rate of growth has really changed. So for NCEA students last year, their rate of growth is just shy of 12%. So it's a significant change between pre-COVID rates of learning and last year. What this report doesn't show, and we'll unpack when we come together in December, is sort of all the nuance that happened in between 2018, 19, and last year. And it'll be really interesting for us to be able to take a look at. We can also see for quantitative reasoning a very similar pattern as we did with mathematics, about just shy of 12%, and then last year at about 14%. So these mathematics and quantitative reasoning skills have not only rebounded, but students are actually accelerating the rate of growth that they had prior to COVID. Reading comprehension, we're sort of right on par. So students have recovered to their rates of growth prior to the pandemic. And then for verbal reasoning and writing concepts and skills, well, sorry, there's a little typo in there. There is just a little bit of a different picture here. So I invite you to consider your own curriculum and what's been happening in your schools of, sort of around that math and that quantitative reasoning, but then also as we think about that verbal reasoning and writing concepts and skills. So here you'll see, and while not statistically different, the students haven't quite returned to that same rate of growth prior to COVID. And it very well be because of perhaps emphasis on math and quantitative reasoning and those types of skill sets. And again, we'll have a more nuanced view when we look at this in December, but definitely invite you to consider this. And does this resonate with what's happening on your campuses? So there's a lot more happening in this graph, but I did want to at least showcase the NCEA data against the NAIS, so National Association of Independent Schools. So again, that NCEA data is going to be in those blue. I just unpacked that for you in that prior slide. And now we'll see in this kind of orange color, we can see what was going on at the national level. So let's just take math for a minute. We already talked about that jump between pre-COVID and last year for NCEA schools. And then we can see a similar pattern, but on a much smaller scale for mathematics. I do want to point out that our NAIS pool of students is many millions of data points, whereas NCEA is going to be much smaller, so many thousands of data points. This is less about the difference between the numbers, but more about just understanding that both our independent schools nationally and then our NCEA schools have exceeded the rate of growth that students are learning math between prior to COVID and then last year. For quantitative reasoning, we see something a little bit different at the national level. Nationally, we haven't quite hit that pre-COVID rate of learning, similar for reading comprehension, reasoning, and writing concepts and skills. And again, some of this is going to be the effect of a much larger norm pool, but it is interesting to notice that our NCEA subset, certainly for math, quantitative reasoning, and reading comprehension, have either returned or exceeded the rate at which they're learning those subjects, whereas collectively, verbal reasoning and writing concepts and skills haven't quite gotten there yet. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information there to unpack. Kind of where we'll kind of bring this home and then leave some time for questions. So please don't hesitate to put those into the chat if you have them. As we think about all of the information that we presented to you today, where we are feeling confident in the research that we do and supported by other research is that we know students can thrive on our school campuses when we're committed not just to their academic learning, but of course also all of the other pieces of a student's well-being and the skill sets they need to navigate life. And as educators, this is just a natural part of the work that we do, but the intentionality behind understanding not only the academic growth, but also understanding where students are with their well-being and their social emotional skill set can provide us a much richer view of students and their student and the data supporting then and helping us to be able to understand and support not only our groups of students, but our individual students as well. And having that viewpoint and that rich set of data can provide you the opportunity to refine programs, celebrate your successes. I think some of that national data we were seeing there is really incredible, the work that we do as educators, and it's easy for us to take a look at some things we might need to improve, but it's also a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate the work that each and every one of you is doing on behalf of your students each day. Students are feeling, by and large, engaged with their work. They're feeling a strong sense of fairness and belonging, and they're also feeling emotionally well, and that's showcasing that in some of the academics as well. So I'm going to pause there for just a minute before I talk about some upcoming opportunities to see, Jen, if there was anything else that you wanted to kind of summarize before we kind of talk about some next steps.
Well, one just really quick note that it's been on the top of my mind as we've been talking about this is just that idea that we talked about fairness and belonging, and when students feel as though they are a part of the school's culture and that the school and their teachers really understand them, that they're able to thrive. And I just think that that's part of the inherent beauty of something like the check-in survey and Selfwise, is that idea that students can feel that you care by consistently asking them some of these probing questions about how they're doing. And I don't know if we, kind of drive that point home that from a student's perspective, it really does feel like my teachers care so much about me that they want to know on a regular basis how I'm feeling, how I'm functioning. And so that act over time, I think, is really meaningful and a big piece of this work and the trends that we're seeing. So I wanted to emphasize that point, but certainly we invite any questions in the chat and anything that we can expand upon or clarify. We would love to do that right now.
Thank you so much, Jen. As we're waiting, if there's any questions, do want to let you know that we have 2 regional conferences coming up in early 2026, and you're all welcome to join us. We'll be diving much deeper into some of this research as well as showcasing some of our member schools that are using these types of tools in this whole child data in some really interesting ways to sort of further their mission and support their students. So we'll be in Nashville, Tennessee on January 14th at Harding Academy. So we're so grateful to them for hosting for us. And then on March 16th, we'll be at the Pegasus School in Huntington Beach, California. So you're welcome to join us if you're available there. You'll see, and we'll certainly share out this slide deck. You can see there. You can visit our website, erblearn.org, and you can get more information about those. And we certainly hope to see you there. We also invite you to reach out to us. You can email us at erbsupport@erblearn.org, and we'll answer any questions that you have about either this research or the tools that you have available to you, should you choose to use so. And Second Step, we actually have a very specific email for them. So secondstep@erblearn.org. Again, if you're interested in using those tools or you're already using those tools, certainly reach out with us. We provide a wide variety of support and professional development and consultation with schools. So we're always happy to hear from you, and certainly hope that we do. So I'm just going to pause for a minute, check in with Jen McPartland or Loretta, any questions that are coming through, or any questions that either of you have, or anything else to share.
There have been no questions in the chat to this point, so unless there's something that someone would like to add at this point, I think we are ready to move to the conclusion of our session, unless there's anything on Loretta's end.
Thank you, Jen. All right. Well, again, before we wrap up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. I will say too, when we regather again, we actually will be producing a white paper that's associated with the research that we showcased today, and then we'll have more of the details about the NCEA specific data at that point. So for those of you who join us at the next webinar, we'll make sure that you get a link once that white paper has been produced, so you'll have an opportunity to read that as well. And it goes into great detail about the methodologies and all that our research team uses to be able to provide us with this type of information and data. So Loretta, anything else to add from your end, or questions from you?
I don't. I have a little way to close us out, but thank you so much. But thank you for attending today's NCEA webinar. NCEA continuously strives to improve the quality of our services for our members based on your feedback. We will use your input to inform future work and improve services. The survey that I have just put in the chat should only take 5 minutes to complete. If you're interested in a certificate of attendance, please include your email and name at the end of the survey. Since your certificate will be sent via an automated email, please check your spam if you do not see the email within a few minutes. Thank you again. This was a wonderful webinar. We appreciate you all for presenting this incredible information to us, and for those of you that attended.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.